So I want to do the same as the other centers here. I want to give you a brief overview about what we're about and a little bit of a commercial, I guess, for some of our sessions today. But I am from the University of Wisconsin, the Center for Financial Security. We are an applied research center, which actually predates the FLRC a little bit. But our focus is really on the overall balance sheet of households, the financial decisions that people make in terms of their assets, their debt, over their life course, and how that affects their ultimate financial security in retirement as well as before retirement. We're an interdisciplinary center. We are a mixture of scholars researchers across different disciplines: economics, sociology, marketing, education, kind of you name it. And library science this year is a new one. So we do have this sort of very interdisciplinary team approach. Our focus is on vulnerable populations, and I'll talk a bit about what I mean by that. But so vulnerable populations is an emphasis of the University of Wisconsin. We are one of the original poverty centers, and a lot of poverty scholars came out of the University of Wisconsin. And so it's an important focus of much of our work is on what we call vulnerable populations. Wisconsin has been a hotbed of a lot of ideas. In fact, some claim even the concept of Social Security was born out of scholars at Wisconsin. And the idea of tenure and scholarly independence that came out of Wisconsin. But in other words, this idea of this Wisconsin idea, which is partly what our center really embraces. The Wisconsin idea was the president of Wisconsin back in 1904 who said that the beneficence of the university should reach every family. This is Charles Van Hise back in 1904. And that's really part of what our center is about too. Really not just doing research for its own sake, but doing outreach and making that research connect to people and connect to policy and to programs out in the field. So we have this strong research and field work focus. Our focus, I would say, is around financial capacity building or financial capability, which includes financial literacy, includes knowledge, includes information, as well as mechanisms and ways to influence decision making about the point in time that decisions are made. So when we talk about vulnerable populations, we mean specifically some people in certain situations and people who fit certain demographics. For example, one obvious one might be people who are low income, right? We can imagine that if you're low income, it's going to be difficult to save, probably likely to have some debt. Being financially secure at any point in time over the life course is going to be a challenge, and particularly in retirement. Our focus this first year was a bit on people in public programs, people who are underbanked or unbanked, those kinds of folks. But we also looked at trigger events, and I think this is an important consideration because any one of us could be financially vulnerable at a given point in time. It doesn't take much to sort of derail the train for most of us. A health problem, a drop in income or a job loss, a significant family change, all those things can cause problems. And also rare events. There are points in time when you get a lump sum or you have a large debt or a large obligation. Those kinds of things can be hiccups along the road. Another focus we have are people with disabilities and their caregivers. We know that a large part of what Social Security does is support people with disabilities, and there are important issues about how those folks can return to work and how they might be encouraged or discouraged from saving over their life course. We also take some time to look at parents of people with disabilities, particularly parents of children who are aging out of the school system, which is somewhat supportive for people with disabilities, and how that transition happens, whether they save or dissave, depending on how they might think about their strategies in that environment. I would characterize our work in this first year as very foundational. We meant it as a sort of exploratory year to get a sense of the landscape, to get a sense of the waterfront around issues of financial literacy and vulnerable populations. You can group our work into three categories. One are literature reviews, just seeing what is known on various topics. The second are looking at survey data, at existing surveys, and sort of digging deeper into them to understand phenomenon related to vulnerable populations and financial literacy. And the last is some qualitative work around focus groups that were conducted with vulnerable populations in various contexts over the last year. So there are about 7 projects, and we're trying to get those out as briefs and as podcasts, and those are available on our website, and some of the booths out here, you can see some of them. We also have a focus on dissemination, trying to make sure that The findings that we have are getting out there. One of the things we learned from some of our focus groups are that, particularly for lower income populations, they learn a lot from listening to the radio and from media kind of attention, local media attention. So for those of you who ever get contacted by the local media and you find this kind of to be not your highest priority, we've learned that that's a really important way to get information out, particularly radio and talk radio. So we're actually doing training with our researchers around how to deal with the media to make that work better. Also a lot around building research infrastructure. Financial literacy for vulnerable populations has not been a well-researched topic. So trying to find good faculty, bring faculty together, conduct workshops, and encourage research in this area. Finally, another emphasis has been developing future researchers, trying to get young graduate students who may be interested in other topics to focus more on this so we can have a new generation of researchers who are focused on asset building and financial literacy and really build the next generation. Thinking about the projects themselves and begin to do my own sales pitch, although it won't be as good as Alicia's, in terms of some of the topics you might want to hear over the next day and a half. We have something called the Wisconsin Longitudinal Survey. This is a survey which was conducted of high school graduates in 1957, and they have been tracked from 1957 until today. So these are people today in their 70s. One of the analogies is if you think about the show Happy Days, I mean that's that generation, right? So the people from the show Happy Days, and it's a tremendous resource, and you'll hopefully hear a lot about that over the next couple of days. Pam Hurd is going to do a session at 10:15 today on that, and there's also booth 7 outside on this topic. But it's a resource where we really do track people from high school, including their high school grades and activities, all the way to the present now as they enter retirement. Another set of topics we have around trigger events. What are those hiccups along the way? What are those places when an otherwise financially secure household can start to have issues that become the beginnings of financial insecurity? And one of those projects is one that Jeffrey Wallace is going to be presenting again at 10:15 today on trigger events using the Health and Retirement Survey. And we learn things about particularly health events. A negative health event can severely derail people's ability to accumulate wealth and to have a secure retirement. I think the other thing we've learned about these trigger events is some of them can be teachable moments. Divorce, marriage, job loss, some of these negative events are points in time when people are making major financial decisions, often under duress, yet with some support might be able to take better and different directions. Some positive events as well, marriage and home buying, those kinds of things. And disability onset and job loss, again, are these opportunities, these sort of trigger events or these teachable moments we can think about. On the Lit Review side, we've spent some time thinking about learning theory. There is a vast theory around education and how people learn and what we might learn from that. And you can hear a bit about that. Wendy Way has both a booth and the booth number 6 outside, and then she's going to be presenting at 3:30 today, summarizing some of that literature. We thought a lot about these ideas of teachable moments and how adult learners learn over the life course. Our emphasis really is from early adulthood and how people begin to make decisions about savings and debt, which can be a significant cause of financial instability later in life, is incurring a lot of debt early in life, all the way through up into retirement and even into managing resources in retirement, so that whole life course perspective. We've thought a bit about this idea of technology-aided learning and how that might vary across different populations. Some populations may be very eager and willing to use technology tools, others maybe less so and need different kinds of approaches. And I think one of the things we've learned from all this theory is that there has been a lot of work in education about how people learn and how we research it. So we can learn a lot from that field and apply that. And that means probably more field experiments. So again, borrowing from the education field in that area. One of the biggest things we did this year was engage in focus groups with vulnerable populations. 26 focus groups all across the country, over 200 participants. Some of these focus groups were focused on people in existing public programs like foreclosure and bankruptcy counseling or job preparation, tax preparation, match savings programs. And really the idea was to talk to people about how they get financial information. Who do they trust? What's the sources of information they learn from? A lot of peers, a lot of the media, that's where we learn some of those kinds of things. And also, to what extent are these programs avenues where we could integrate financial literacy? Where could we sort of combine these existing programs that are out there in the field and just add a little bit more information about managing your finances or managing your debt or those kinds of topics? We also did a series of focus groups with people with disabilities and their caregivers. So some of these were parents of kids who were 16 to 20 years old who were aging out of the school system and the decisions they were making about setting up trusts or other kinds of activities they were doing for the people they were guardians for. And also issues of people who were in the workforce, who were on disability in the workforce and the kinds of decisions they were making to maintain their access both to disability benefits as well as health benefits. And then finally, we did a set of focus groups with people who were unattached to any public programs, but were just low-wage employees of a large logistics warehouse, so to give us some comparison point. And then we did some, in terms of where you can learn more about these, there's going to be 3 sessions actually on focus groups here. Jennifer Turnham's going to do one today at 10:15. There'll be another session at 1:30 with Kathy Dahlem, and then I'll be doing just a quick session about some of the methodology at 3:30. So lots of opportunities to hear about the focus group work, and I hope you gain from that. Last, we did a literature review and a quick survey, some quick survey work around advice models, thinking about how people get financial advice, who do they trust, and particularly thinking about what forms of counseling and coaching that might take place. I'll talk a bit about that tomorrow, and there's also a booth number 8 outside that talks a bit about this. So some of the, I guess, overview of some of the big picture findings I think we took away from year 1 is, one, we probably do have good measures of financial literacy that go beyond, do you know some trivial or factual questions about financial topics. We have these embedded financial capacity or financial behavior measures. Things like in the Wisconsin Longitudinal Survey, and this is what Pam Hurdle talked a little bit about this morning, is when people say they don't know. When you ask them how much their pension or savings account is. So we have these embedded measures that we can probably use to a better extent, particularly when we're talking about vulnerable populations for whom some of the portfolio theory may not be as relevant. We also need to better understand trigger events. We know that there's this sort of theoretical glide path that we're all on towards retirement and financial security, but we also know that for some portion of people, there's going to be lots of things that come along that are random and unexpected and unpredictable, and how do you get over those kinds of events? Because they do happen. And thinking about the role of financial literacy as a sort of resilience factor, does that help people get through these moments in time? Around the advice models, we certainly have reviewed a number of studies of advice models, and we find primarily that people who go for financial advice tend to be the highest educated, the most wealthy. Oftentimes they don't even follow the advice that they're given. So the people who you think of as being sort of low financial literacy or low functionally financially literate are those who are least likely to get advice and counseling. So we have this sort of mismatch. Plus when they do get it, it doesn't necessarily get followed. And then finally, thinking about education strategies, again, thinking more about education theory, and just a lot of cautions about mode of delivery. There probably isn't a one-size-all mode of delivery for financial literacy, and it's probably cumulative, meaning that it's something that we accumulate over the life course, rather than just a point-in-time sort of fix. You know, it's not like you get the vaccination and then you're cured. It requires multiple doses over the period of time. And I would emphasize this, we hear a lot about the role of media, especially local media, peers, family, all these are strong influences in how people get information. Those are trusted resources, maybe not accurate resources, but trusted resources. Thinking about the bigger picture of our center, we've tried to do meetings a couple times a month with all the researchers and graduate assistants who are involved in our projects. And we've had these sort of fundamental discussions or fundamental debates. And so you may say, well, this is just academic navel-gazing, and you might be right. But it has helped us think a little bit harder about what we're trying to do. One of the things is the term financial literacy is a clunky term. It's not at all clear that financial literacy captures what we really think about. It's not like reading literacy. It's not like you learn it when you're 7 and then you have it for a lifetime. It is something that evolves over a life course. We have these confounds with numeracy. Is it that you aren't financially literate, you don't know financial stuff, or is it that you can't do numerical calculations? And then if you can't do numerical calculations, is it because you weren't patient enough in school to go through those classes, and therefore you're not patient enough now to save? Or is there something else going on? So we have all these mixed causal kind of effects going on. The other thing we know is that you can be highly financially literate and still not engage in positive financial behavior. I think we're probably all guilty of that, right? So think about that in terms of nutrition. We all know what fat and calories are, yet we still eat the brand, whatever it is, the pastries that are outside. You know, I think the other thing to think about is this sort of knowledge as a moderator. During financial shocks, nothing's going to protect us entirely, but knowledge might help us to be prepared for some of those kinds of issues. And then finally, this sort of life course model. How do we accumulate or acquire financial knowledge and modify our financial behaviors over the life course? We've thought a lot about contexts and institutional mechanisms. It's more than just process. And it's more than just the product, it's about proximity. Sometimes it's about what is convenient, what's close by, who's close by, and how can I use those things. And then finally, these sort of affective things, this is sort of emotional kind of stuff. How to trust and patience and self-control, how do these things play into this? And it's clear that it is a complicated story as we think about these things. So we don't have answers to any of these questions, but I think these just help us, again, think harder about what it is we're trying to do and what is the role of financial literacy as we think about all this. Just to sort of sum up where we're at, and as we think about going for the future, and you heard about a little bit of that from Alicia's remarks too, is that year one was the start, and now we're beginning to think about where the future goes. And for us, this means framing our work in the future in sort of three big buckets. One is around measurement. We need better measures of what we mean by financial capacity or financial literacy. Better roadmaps. How do we know where we're going, and how do we have good measures of where we're at? And then also connecting the financial literacy to the financial well-being and ultimately to the financial security, because obviously these things, while they may be correlated, are not entirely a one-to-one match. Next, thinking about testing, what really works, and coming up with more rigorous models for testing. You're going to hear a lot about that, I think, over the next day and a half, about field research and this focus on experimental design. What we know right now is that people who seek out financial education and financial literacy tend to be among the most financially literate and most educated. So thinking about how to get around that selection problem, that who volunteers to come in the room kind of problem. And then finally, targeting. How do we really triage our efforts? How do we think about, with more granularity, who is it that we're really trying to focus on for financial literacy, and how do we target them? When do we target them? What's the information they really need at that point in time? Again, thinking about a life course model, we don't have to do it all at one time. We can do it over the life course as events come up. And then the how. Is it technology aided? Is it one-to-one? Is it some kind of mix of those things? And ultimately, for some people, it may mean some behavioral constraints. How do we really get people to not only know what to do, but give them some parameters so they're sort of forced to do it? We'll talk more about year two later, but we have 14 projects planned this year, and they do sort of fit in these buckets, and I just want to make that point, that we really are trying to build. A big project over this next year will be expanding the Wisconsin Longitudinal Survey to really have more robust financial literacy measures and to do that better, and to think harder about the reliability and validity of the measures we have. Lots of testing experiments, and again, you're going to hear a lot about that for the next couple of days. And then more targeting, and I think that's where we really look for your input too. What are some of those special populations, those vulnerable points in time that we ought to be focused on, whether it's people with disabilities, women, seniors with cognitive decline, those kinds of things. And then these social effects. I think that's going to be another important part for us to think about, is not just the information, but the context in which the information is delivered. So I want to thank you all for being here. Again, I want to thank Anna and her team for putting this together, and for all the researchers for their presentations. I think we'll all learn a lot together, and I look forward to seeing you here next year as well.